Hey everyone, this Sunday was a really unique Sunday where we had the opportunity to ask Pastor Mark on the spot the biggest questions about our Christian faith, the things that we had in our heads and our hearts and the questions we have about our faith. We know in 1 Peter it tells us that we need to be prepared to defend our faith in a gentle and respectful way, to talk about what we believe and why we have hope in Jesus. So what we've done is we've actually chosen some of our favorite clips from this Sunday that you and your groups are able to watch the responses to and then answer and talk about in your groups. So we hope this helps you to be able to defend your Christian faith when you're in the hot seat.
Do you believe there are errors in the Bible today? Really important question. As we move forward over the last bunch of years, I was reading actually a study this week that talked about the reason people abandon Christianity, the reason they stop believing in Christianity. And it's been over the last 100 years or so that it used to be that people stopped believing in Christianity because of creation issues or other questions. And now, one of the major reasons that people leave Christianity among millennials is this question right here. They believe that the Bible is filled with errors. So, no, I don't believe there are errors in the Bible. I think there are different translations of the Bible. Of course, when you're taking something from the original language, so the Bible is written in Hebrew and then the New Testament in Greek. And what you have is sometimes you have to bring over certain words and you have to nuance them and try to figure out how can you translate a concept over to a modern language. And sometimes in that there might be a translation breakdown or something, but I don't think there are errors. I think, for instance, in the Greek, when you read Romans chapter 3, Paul talks about the idea that the cross of Christ is a propitiation for your sins. Now, depending on which translation you read, you might read the NIV, for instance, and the NIV will say that the cross of Christ is a sacrifice of atonement. But then you read the NASB or the ESV, which we preach from here, and it retains the word propitiation. And the reason for that is because propitiation meant two things. It meant the sacrifice of atonement, but it also meant absorbing the wrath of God. So if you're NIV and you're trying to figure out, no one even knows, like, for instance, my family, they don't believe in Christianity at all. So as I hand them a Bible and they open up Romans 3 and they read it, they're going to be like, propiti, what? I don't know what that word means. So the NIV says, well, how do we tell them what it means? So they tell them what it means, but the problem is it only captures half of what it means, because sacrifice of atonement's half it, but the other half is that that the cross of Christ absorbs the wrath of God onto himself and pays for sin. So in that sense, there's not errors, there's just nuance that might be lost in one translation or another. Classically, the things that people have raised that have said there are errors in the Bible, and then the list of examples people give, most of them have been shown to be false. So I'll give you a couple examples. In Matthew's gospel, the gospel that we're studying, by the time we get to the resurrection narrative, there are two angels at the tomb. But if you read Mark's gospel, there is one angel that speaks. And so skeptics have come along and said, look, Matthew says there are two angels. Mark says there are one angel. There is errors in the Bible. Let's throw it out and let's not trust it. But mathematically, here's what we got to understand, and I know this will blow your mind. Where there is two, there is one. So, what Mark is doing is he's simply saying one spoke and honing in on the one that's speaking. Mark doesn't say in his resurrection story, there was only one, there was not two. He simply says there was one and he spoke this way and he said this. Matthew tells us there was two. So was there one or two? There was two, but Mark hones in on the one. Another example is people say, well, look, this account of Judas' death say that he hung himself. The other account of Judas' death says that his guts spilled out all over a field. Look, the Bible's wrong. It gives two contrary accounts of the death of Judas. Let's throw out our Bibles and not believe it anymore. Problem with that is those aren't contradictions. Judas hung himself, yes. He hung there for a while, and then as time went on, his body expanded, the rope broke, he fell down on some rocks, and his body exploded, and his guts went all over the place, and that's why they named this field this. Those aren't contradictions. They're simply different angles in on the same story. Here's what we've got to understand. When we read the Bible, do not come at the scriptures with an anachronistic mindset, meaning that we're 21st century Canadian modern Christians and we do documentaries a particular way. We write people's biographies in a particular way. But we can't take that construct and project it back on the Bible and say, the Bible has to be exactly what I think the Bible should be. So the Gospels are a particular genre of literature, and they're writing Jesus' story not as a biography. So if you read John, there's no birth narrative. If you read Mark, there's no birth narrative. Only Luke and Matthew give us a birth narrative. Because in the first century, the genre of gospel didn't necessitate someone takes someone's birth and explains everything chronologically. It had the freedom to take information and actually arrange it according to a theological purpose. And so when we're reading Matthew has the freedom to take information Jesus said at the end of his ministry and bring it into the beginning. I'll give you a classic example of this. In the Synoptic Gospels, which are Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus walks into Jerusalem at the end of his ministry, and he goes into the temple. Remember the story? And he doesn't like what's happening in the temple, and so he makes a whip, which is just crazy. As an aside, he made a whip. He didn't take one out that had already there. He didn't grab some. He sat down for a while and made one, and then started whipping animals and tables, and he gets all angry. That's at the end of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. But in John's gospel, it happens in John chapter 2, right at the beginning of his ministry. So scholars say, well, what happened? Was it at the end? Was it at the beginning? Or did he do it twice? I don't think he did it twice. I think if he did it once, that would have been enough for the Jews and the Roman Empire to get on him and focus on him and kill him quickly. I think John has the freedom to take something that happened at the end of Jesus' life and bring it into the beginning, because John is trying to do a particular theological thing. He's just come from the wedding of Cana, and he said, look at these jars of purification. I'm superseding this and I'm bringing the new wine. The next story is he goes into the temple and he says, I'm superseding this temple with I'm the new temple. And so John goes, oh, I want to take this story and bring it into the marriage ceremony because they're making the same point. That's the freedom that they actually had. We don't have, I'm reading a biography right now on Walt Disney. A modern biography does not have the freedom to take something that happened at the end of Disney's life and bring it into it doesn't say, Walt Disney built Disney World when he was 4 years old. All right? We'd be like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Because a modern biography has to be strictly chronological. That's not the way the first century worked. It's not the way the Old Testament worked. So don't bring your modern framework and put it onto the Bible and say, oh, look. And there's lots of examples. You can read a book by Norm Geisler that goes through almost every example of anything anybody's ever raised and said, look at this, the Bible has errors in it. It contradicts itself, and he goes through and explains them all. Sometimes it's a number that contradicts another number. First Chronicles says there was this many people. Numbers says it's because they're rounding up. They have the freedom to leave the children out or whatever. These aren't massive contradictions. They're just different angles on the same story. All right, like us watching a car crash. One person saw it was a blue car. It's different angles of the same story, but it's true, and there aren't mistakes in the text. All right? Why does God seem so different between the New and Old Testaments? Because the rules changed. When Jesus came, there was a separation in salvation history about the way things worked. In the Old Testament, there was dietary laws and Sabbath and circumcision and these kind of things that meant something, and they were very meaningful. When Jesus came and died on the cross, he accomplished something that broke history in half, and he said, now the rules have changed. Things are actually different. And so you read Acts chapter 10, and the blanket of food comes down. It's like, hey, remember all these foods that you kept kosher and you couldn't eat? Now kill and eat. Because I've made all things clean. The death and something happened, more happened in the death and resurrection of Jesus than we sometimes give credit. And so yes, God functioned differently because Israel was a theocracy. Israel, it meant something that they went around killing people, tried to establish a land. But in the New Testament, it's not about a theocracy and killing people to own land. The kingdom of God is a multinational spiritual kingdom. It's not about one particular people now that are supposed to fight for land. All that's over. It's now made up of every race under the sun who believe in Jesus, every tongue, every tribe, every nation. So God doesn't care about land anymore. Something shifted in the New Testament with the accomplishment of Jesus. Land stopped being important. Tribal wars stopped being important. And now it's about who believes in Jesus, who actually follows the spiritual kingdom of God. So there's a difference. Can't afford to get married. Sweet. How are we supposed to abstain from sex? We've been dating for 5 years. I dated for 5 years and I did it. Bam! Not everyone's as strong as me. Okay, first off, the first line is completely crazy. Can't afford it? You have bought into some myth that your wedding needs to cost an average, the average wedding in the United States costs $32,000. So you've bought into a myth that you got to do that. Look, I'll marry you on the stage right now. Free. $500. That's how much it costs you to get married, man. It's not about money. It's not about throwing some nonsense. Look, you have to prepare for a marriage, not a wedding, right? Preparing your life for a marriage with somebody who is as crazy and sinful as you are. That's what you got to prepare for. Right? Listen, and don't think that when you get married, everything's going to be, it's going to be this, the work you have to do is not about affording some kind of marriage. It's about, have I invested in the person and figured out how we get disconnected? Because men and women, as I talked about in the service before, men and women are vastly different. I have 3 daughters. My wife can give them a list of things to do. Because they say that men have kind of this, in their mind, by way of information, they have a road. And the road goes kind of 2 directions. Like it goes this way, and that's kind of the male brain. But then the female brain, they say, is the information superhighway. There's like all kinds of turns and twists and 1,000 things happening. Where my wife can tell my girls, do this, no, and do it all. And my wife starts talking. She gets to like 3rd thing on the list. I'm like, stop talking. I can't even handle it. So I'll go down. She'll be like, okay, take the clothes out of the washer. So I'll go, okay, good, stop. And I'll run down and put them, boom. And then I'll go back upstairs and go, what's next? She'll put them in the dryer. Right, okay. 1 thing at a time, maybe 2 as a guy. These are completely different worlds, man. So you're going to marry this person, and you guys are crazy, and you're different, and it's men, and it's women, and it's communication. 2 biggest things in marriage that bring down marriages: sex and money. Make sure that you have those things figured out, because you need to start talking about, what's our sex life going to look like? How are we going to actually budget and spend money? All right, it doesn't matter if you have a lot or a little. You got to budget it no matter what. You got to figure out what you're going to prioritize. Make sure you have sexual expectations that are clear. I know a lot of people, they get married, they assumed way too much about the sexual conversation. They get married, there's failed expectations. And so you got to be investing in the communication, the conflict, and the sex, and the money conversation. Investing in the wedding, man, don't buy into that myth. You get married when it's very clear in front of the Lord, in front of the people who are closest to you. This is time, this is the person. You get married, man, for free. Don't waste your money on that stuff. And then you go forward and you serve the Lord. And man, what do you need? What do you need? You need love and air. Right? When my wife and I got married, we had 0 money. I had debt from school. And we got married and we got in a car and we drove across the country and we knew nobody. And it was the middle of the summer, and we drove through Montana. We were coming to Vancouver, and the air conditioning blew in her old car. And so we had this ice bucket, and we would take our socks, and we would dip it in the ice, and we'd put it on our head like that just to stay warm, cool. It was disgusting. And we came across it. We knew nobody, and we had no money, and I was going to go to Regent and spend a bunch of money. She was working at a daycare. We had nothing. Because that's not what marriage is. It's not about having a bunch of money. That's part of the adventure. And so making sure before the Lord, before people around you, man, we support this, whatever, and we go forward with that. So yeah, man, how are you supposed to abstain from sex? I would say 5 years is one of the ways that you actually succeed at abstaining from having sex. 5 years too long. I did it for 5 years, crazy town. I would never tell someone to do that. And so in the Bible, it's a crazy concept to date someone for 5 years, right? Biblically speaking, you're dating for marriage and you're working toward marriage, and probably dating for 5 years, you're setting yourself up for failure. But you abstain from sex by having self-mastery. Tim Keller talks about, in our culture, we celebrate guys and oh, guys, they can go around and sleep with anyone, and raw guys, we're alpha males. Where every other culture in the world all throughout history, they celebrated when men actually had self-mastery. When they could control themselves enough not to sleep around, that was a guy you wanted to follow. That was who the tribe respected. The tribe never respected the guy, because every guy wanted to. It wasn't an issue of wanting to, it's an issue of who doesn't, because that's the guy we should follow. That's the guy we should respect. Becoming those kind of men who take the responsibility for abstaining from sex. If I sit down with a couple and they say, yeah, we're sleeping together, I just look to him. It's your fault. But she, no, your fault. You're the guy, you're supposed to lead her. But she looks so hot, run. Dude, when Potiphar's wife, who is super hot in Genesis, tried to hit on Joseph and get him to sleep with her, he literally ran out of the room and left his clothes in her hand, and he ran around naked into the street. That's what some of you guys should look like, all right? She tried to sleep with me. All right. Next question.